Good afternoon. Glad to see everyone today. I think just looking at the participant list, I know a lot of you, but maybe not all of you yet. If there's somebody here that I don't know yet, good afternoon. My name is Jenifer Bean. I am the Director of CCR Assessment and the High School Equivalency Office. Um, Nice long title to my job, but that basically means that I am the test lady. So basically, if you need to know anything about high school equivalency testing, high sit GED, if you need to know anything about our CCR testing, TABE, CASAS, best work keys, I am here as a resource for all of the above. Today, specifically, I am wearing the CCR assessment hat. And we are taking some time today to talk about TABE. So we've had quite a few shifts. We've had quite a few bits of news over the last, I'd say, year or so about TABE and some changes to those assessments. Wanted to take some time today to talk with everybody about the new TABE tests, about the assessment transition for moving from the old TABE series to the new TABE series, some conversation about sunsetting the old outgoing tests, and just kind of some time for to ask some questions that you guys had posed previously, as well as time for you to ask any questions that you may have about the TABE transition. So, with all that being said, just please feel free to pop questions in the chat. I know Lee is here with us today, and Lee, would it be okay for when we stop if you could read the questions from the chat, because it's hard for me to see the chat from kind of where I am here.
Can do.
Cool. Thank you so much. So we'll grab Lee to get anything from the chat. Also, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question and would like to come off mute and on mic and ask your question. Would be happy to take those as we get to them. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with our new assessment training for TABE. There we go. All right, so what's the purpose of today's webinar? A purpose today is to assist providers who use TABE assessments with the transition to the newest test series from DRC. Of course, if you are with us and you do not normally use TABE, that's absolutely fine. You do not have to be a TABE user to join us today, but just wanted to make sure everybody is aware that we will primarily be addressing TABE. Rather than any of our other assessment vendors today. And we will not be addressing high school equivalency today either. Please feel free to get those questions to me later if you would like to ask those. But we will be focusing today specifically on TABE, on the test transitions to the new series. So we've got three main objectives for today. Our first objective is to introduce the new TABE assessments. Second is to discuss some considerations and some resources for implementing the new assessments. So what do we need to, essentially, what do we need to know about the new tests? What do we need to consider when we are making plans to transition to the new test series? And then we'll end with some directions about transitioning away from the outgoing assessments, as well as I mentioned, some general TABE questions that I received in the lead up to this webinar. But first, I would like to ask for a little bit of an informal poll. Where you are right now in the process of transitioning to the new TABE assessments. So I've got four options here. Number one, you haven't started any of your of the transition to TABE 1314 or Forms C and D of TABE CLAS-E. You haven't done anything yet. Number two would be you've purchased the materials, but you haven't started using them. Option three is you've started piloting your assessments with either individual students or with small groups. So you've got you've done a few test sessions here and there with a few people. Or number four, you've implemented the new TABE assessments past the pilot stage. So that's TABE 1314 and CLAS-E Forms C and D. So if you guys don't mind putting in the chat for me where you are, I'm seeing a good spread of 2s, 3s, and 4s so far. Very cool to my fours who've already pretty much made the transition over. That's really cool. Um, we've got a couple ones. That's okay too, because we've still got some time, especially, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. We did receive some news from Octay a couple weeks ago about an extension to tape 1112. So if you're at that one, not a problem. We do want to move you into a two or a three pretty soon if you're at that level, at that stage one right now. But again, if you're at a one, we've still got time. But I'm seeing a good spread across one through four. So very cool. And that tells me that we are kind of talking to everybody today. So I'll try not to linger too much on the basics for those of you guys who are at a four, but I do want to at least make sure that we are touching on those basics for my ones, so that my ones will be aware of what's going on and what steps need to be taken from here. So thank you guys for that poll. If anybody wants to put up a number you haven't yet, feel free to do that while I'm talking over these next few slides. But just want to thank you guys for letting me know where you are right now. Great. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a brief meeting with the new assessments. I do want to just very briefly mention, if you guys took about 2 years ago, we did a similar webinar like this for CASAS and BEST, because CASAS and BEST were coming out with their new assessments about this time a couple of years ago. You'll probably notice that the structure is very similar to that. We want to make sure that we're providing the same types of information for the new TABE assessments that we did when for the new CASAS and BEST assessments when those came out a couple of years ago. So if the form here seems a little familiar, that's probably why. So first of all, why new assessments? Why are we making this change? So in the case of TABE 1314, we're making the change because there are some updated test items from TABE 1112, just making sure to refresh the test items so students might not be over-tested on the TABE 1112 items, so kind of moving forward on that. I know there were also some test design changes, and I'm going to provide a link to some of that information to you guys, and also some of the time limit stuff changed as well. Again, we'll go over that when we get into a future slide. So TABE 1314 is making those changes from TABE 1112. TABE CLAS-E is coming up with new forms because there was a requirement again about 2 years ago from Octay that any new ESL assessments that were going to be approved had to be aligned to the English language proficiency standards. And once you guys get these slides, there will be a link to the text of the English language proficiency standards. That included any existing ESL tests, of which TABE CLAS-E was one. So it was necessary for the new series of TABE CLAS-E to be created in order to align with the English language proficiency standards, which we're going to be referring to as the ELP standards from here on forward. So both of these series from TABE have experienced changes. We'll talk a little bit more about those specific changes shortly, but that's just a general, why do we have them? Why did we may have changes? So let's talk about each of those assessment series and look at just kind of a snapshot of each one of those. So first, TABE 1314. This test is meant to serve students in adult basic and adult secondary education classes. So this is your students who are in any ABE or adult secondary class, high school equivalency, preparation. I know a lot of you guys serve students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Any of those sorts of classes are who the TABE 1314's audience is. TABE 1314, just as TABE 1112 and the previous series did, they assess reading, math, and language. So there are 3 sections. Any or all of those sections can be taken by students. Just based on a conversation I had recently with the provider, I do just want to mention that it is not necessary to test in all 3 subjects. When you administer this test. If a student is only coming to you because they need help in math, it's okay to just do the math section of the TABE assessment, unless you have some sort of a local policy that says, all students need to take at least the reading test. I'm not going to infringe on your local policy if that's it, but from a state perspective and from our vendor perspective, it is okay for a student to kind of for you to kind of pick and choose sections based on student needs. TABE 1314 is offered as both a paper-based test and a computer-based test. I'm guessing my folks who are my fours are probably offering this as a computer-based test because computer-based TABE 1314 has been available since January. I believe the orders forms just very recently came out for the paper-based TABE 1314, so those should be coming to you soon if you've ordered them. And then TABE 1314 will be approved through June 20th, 2027. So in about 2027, we'll probably begin having these conversations again. Unless TABE 1314's approval is extended, we'll either be talking about that approval extension or we'll be talking about TABE 1516. I guess we'll figure out which one it is when we get a little closer. So, but for right now, we've been informed that June 20th, 2027 is when TABE 1314 will be expiring with a likely, and I want to say likely just because it's not in stone, but Octave often allows for a sunset period all the way to June 30th of that year to ensure that the test is able to be used until the end of program year. So again, as we mentioned on the previous slide, there are a few small changes from TABE 1112. Mostly it's just refreshing test items to make sure that, again, students aren't being over-tested on the same items over and over again. But additionally, and there is a link here for more information, the reading load has been reduced on TABE 1314. So I remember, because I was working at a local provider when TABE 1112 came out, and I remember that one of the big changes was that the reading passages had gotten much, much longer than they had previously under TABE 910. One of the things that TABE 1314 has done is that they have shortened the passages from where they were in TABE 1112 so that that reading load for students is reduced. There are some more details about that in the document that's linked to this slide, but that is something I want to mention because again, like I said, I was working at a local provider when we transitioned to TABE 1112. I remember what a change that was. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that that's one of the changes that's being made in TABE 1314. The other new series from TABE is TABE CLAS-E Forms C and D. So this is the new series that TABE is putting out for ESL students. To this point, TABE, for those of you who've used TABE CLAS-E, you have been assessing students in Forms A and B. So we are now moving on to Forms C and D. As with the original forms for TABE, the new forms of TABE assess reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So all four of those kind of subject areas that we want to make sure our ESL students are making progress in. Again, similar to our adult basic ed assessments, you do not have to administer all four. You do not have to administer all four subjects to an ESL learner, but you can if you wish to. It depends on what their goals are and what you're looking to measure for those students' outcomes. I will say though that the more subjects you pre-test in, the more opportunities that student has to make a gain. Just to kind of as a general thought to consider. But again, it really is dependent on the student's goals and what you think is most appropriate for them. Similar to TABE 1314, the new CLAS-E series will be offered on both paper and computer-based testing. Again, similar to previous to the TABE 1314, if you are using computer-based tests, those tests have been available since last fall. I believe they came out last September. For the computer-based CLAS-E, and the paper-based CLAS-E is, I believe, being the order form again came out at the same time as TABE 1314 paper-based testing. So those should start coming to you very soon if you've ordered paper-based TABE CLAS-E Form C and D. Similar to TABE 1314 because they were approved on the same day. The current approval expires on June 20th, 2027, with a possibility of extending to June 30th to provide sunset period to the end of the year, but we will look out and see if that becomes official a little closer to June 2027. And then there's a little bit more of a significant change for the new Class-E series as opposed to the to TABE 1314. Again, as mentioned previously, the new TABE Class-E assessments are now aligned to the English language proficiency standards. That's again by requirement of OCTAE. It is required that all ESL assessments are aligned to those standards. So the new TABE Class-E items are aligned there. And additionally, TABE Class-E, as Forms A and B came out quite some time ago. I can't remember the exact year. I'd need to go back and look, but those tests were released quite some time ago, and it was time to kind of refresh the items. And we're not going to make our students write a check. We're not going to have them go through like a library catalog card and make sure they understand what that's about. We do want to include items about email or digital communication. So some of those changes also have come about, just as when we were talking about our other assessment vendors refreshing their items. Similar refreshes to TABE Class-E in the new forms. So just kind of some themes around these changes. Basically for ESL, again, making sure to align with the English language proficiency standards, and then just updating items in both series to reflect modern life, making sure that the questions, the items that students see are going to have bearing on the things that they are going to see when they encounter English for our ESL learners, and just when they encounter everyday life for all of our learners in general. All right. So I'm going to stop here before we get to strategies and resources. Let me stop and see if there are any questions. Lee, are you seeing anything coming through the chat?
So far, I haven't seen anything, but
Okay.
feel free to type.
Yep, guys, if you are, I'm going to give you guys just a minute to type anything in that you need to. I'm also going to look for any raised hands that may come up. And I'm happy to get those questions from you if you have any questions kind of about this, the basic information about TABE, the new TABE series, I should say. Okay, Jenifer Wellner. Yes, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and there will be a link to this on a future slide, but I will say the online order forms for the paper-based tests are on the TABE website, right? That is correct. And I will give you guys some directions about how to get to the order forms. Thank you for asking, Jenifer. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Any other questions about kind of general questions about the new series before we move on to some specific strategies and resources? Okay. Lee, if you don't mind just continuing to look in case there's, I'm sorry. Tracy asks, where do you find the grade levels? Tracy, that's a good question. I believe, I'm not sure if TABE is continuing to align to grade equivalency levels. That's something I'm going to look at and follow up on, just because I know that that's something that TABE moved away from when they moved to TABE 1112. If it's there, it's probably going to be on the resources tab on the TABE website, but let me write that question down real quickly just so that I can look at that. Okay, Tracy? So grade level equivalencies. And I take it you're talking about TABE 1314, correct, Tracy? Okay, great. So I'll look that up. Again, I'm gonna think that if it's there, it will be on the resources tab, but we'll take a look at that and I'll get that information. Thanks for asking. All right, Lee, I'm gonna go ahead, but let me know, please, if there's anything else that comes up in the chat.
Will do.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right.
Okay.
So strategies and resources. So these are just, so now that we've kind of introduced ourselves to the new tests, we've gotten some basic information. Let's talk strategies. Let's talk about what we are going to do in terms of practical steps to help our students and our programs transition from the outgoing series to the newer series. So here's just some general things to think about. Plan carefully. Consider your 5 W's and 1 H. So basically think through, if you think about your 5 W's, you teach these to your beginning learners, your beginning ESL students, those sorts of learners. Who needs to know about this? Think about for your program, who needs to know about this change? What do they need to know? Um, where and when are we going to implement this? You're thinking about timelines, thinking about when and how, um, why, making sure that folks know why we're implementing new tests and how. What is our process going to be to implement this new test? So basically thinking through how you're going to do this, what makes sense for your students, what makes sense for your program, what's your plan going to be based on that. Kind of speaking to that, when have a timeline. I think having a timeline is a very helpful thing so that you can determine when you're going to tell people, when you're going to train people, when you're going to start piloting, if you're going to do a pilot, when you're going to start doing this with your students in general. Um, Obviously, we do have a time limit. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But just a couple of considerations. These are things that came out of our CASAS transitions that I wanted to just put forth as considerations as you're thinking about this. Do you think that for your program, it would be right to pilot some of your tests, pilot the new tests with some small groups? I think I had a few folks who answered 3 when we did our poll at the beginning. And 3 was basically, are you piloting this with individual students or small groups before uh, before putting this out to your whole program? So if that's right for you, if it's right for you to say, okay, we're going to take students from class X, class Y, and class Z, and we'll administer the new test to them. Absolutely, that might be one way you go about it. Another consideration that came from our CASAS transition that I wanted to bring forward is the possibility of starting with new students and students who are in lower level classes. So maybe you've got students who are coming into your classes for the first time, as we're kind of moving through the summer. Maybe those students are the first ones to get TABE 13, 14, or get the new forms of TABE CLAS-E. And then we start with our level 1 learners, our lowest proficiency learners, and just start with them. And then the new tests will follow them as they progress through the program. And then from there, you can also start assessing your higher level students, your higher proficiency students on the new tests as you're working your way up. As we're going to talk about in a minute, you've got a little bit more time on this with TABE 11, 12 to 13, 14 than for TABE CLAS-E. Just because the timeline is kind of tight on that one, but this is just kind of putting it out there for everybody to consider. Another thing just to keep in mind is just to communicate. Make sure everyone understands that number 1, new tests are coming and or are here. And then again, we've mentioned the 5 W's. Why? Why are there new tests? So obviously explaining this to a student is going to look different from explaining this to an instructor, but just thinking about how you're going to communicate this to everybody. And yes, please include your students in your communication. Your students are going to be very confused. Teacher, why doesn't this test look like the one I took before? So, thinking of some way to communicate with your students that this test transition is occurring. Again, whatever makes the most sense for your students, however communicating that works to them. We want to make sure everybody is aware of the change in the test, essentially. And then going with communication training. So basically making sure that any staff member who's going to be, whether they're going to be administering the test, whether they're going to be teaching students who will be taking the test, staff who are a little bit, your staff of directors, coordinators, lead instructors, whichever, and your data coordinators as well. Your data managers also need to be aware of the new tests coming in. Um, think about what training needs to happen for those staff members. I'm hoping this is going to be a good springboard. I'm also going to be providing links to TABE's training for the new series. And as I'm going to mention again, maybe a couple more times during this webinar and again at the end, I am always available for technical assistance with folks if you need to think through some of these strategies about how you're going to push this out to your programs. But making sure that your staff, any staff members who are going to be interacting with testing, even if it's just through they're going to be teaching students who will be taking the test. That training is going to be important. And then, of course, just do what makes sense for your program. What makes sense for our larger programs who have thousands and thousands of students is probably not going to make sense for our smaller programs who serve a couple hundred students a year. Think about what makes sense for your program. And again, if you need to talk with me and talk through this, please, please do that. I'm very available for that if you'd like to think through that process for your program. And then again, as you're doing your test transition, just being aware that TABE CLAS-E Forms A and B are approval is expiring on June 30th, so that is next month. It is a little over a month from today. So please make sure that if you've been using TABE CLAS-E Forms A and B, that you're starting to wrap that up. You might want to very carefully consider pre-testing any more students in that, or if we want to just make sure that we're pre-testing students in Forms C and D. And then TABE 11-12 has been extended for a year, as we mentioned earlier, to be used until June 30th, 2026. So we do have a little bit more time for TABE 11-12 based on the Federal Register update that we got from Octay a couple weeks ago. It's probably good to consider a cutoff date for using these series as pre-tests. So again, think about what makes sense for your calendar and for your students. If it doesn't make sense to pre-test anyone on Forms A and B after June 1st, 2025, that might be your hard stop date. But I would recommend just making a hard stop date for the outgoing tests to make sure that you don't end up in a situation where a student has pre-tested on the old test series and now they can't post-test because the series is expired. The approval has expired. So again, just thinking strategically, thinking about what makes sense for your calendar and your students. And then here are some resources just that are provided from TABE to help with understanding the new test series. First of all, just there's a general resources tab on the TABE website. If you go to the resources tab, there are a ton of resources for every current series. And that does include for right now, TABE CLAS-E A and B, because it doesn't expire until the end of next month. But basically, there's a lot of stuff on there, and I would recommend going through that if you have the chance to do so. I do want to point out 3 specific starting points that I think will help, especially as you're thinking about instruction and how to teach your students who will be taking these assessments. The number one thing I always recommend when we're thinking about instruction is the test blueprints. Both CASAS and TABE have test blueprints. For TABE, that is under the resources tab for each of the test series. I think the only one that does not have blueprints is the outgoing CLAS-E Forms A and B, but there are blueprints for TABE 11-12, TABE 13-14, and for CLAS-E Forms C and D. So essentially, a test blueprint tells you which objectives are being assessed on each test series and how much weight each of them has. So you might see that some objectives have a heavier weight than others. Obviously, it's good to touch on as many objectives as possible and um, as you can fit in a quality manner. Obviously we don't want to just cover material. That's never, we never want to just cover material, but we do want to teach students as much as we can that makes sense. However, if you look at the blueprints, it'll tell you which objectives have a heavier weight than others when students are being assessed on the test. And again, this is not an invitation to teach to the test. This is just being aware of what students will see when they take each level of the assessment. When you guys get these slides, there will be a link for the test blueprints for TABE 1314 and a link for CLAS-E Forms C and D. Another thing that I want to draw your attention to, especially for your students who might be taking the TABE math tests, the TABE website resources tab has math reference sheets. So these are things just to be aware of if you or one of your instructors are teaching math to students. There is a calculator guide for TABE 1314. So this introduces students, if you're especially for your computer-based testers, this introduces students to the calculator, the buttons, and the functions that students will be seeing on the calculator when they take the test. Now, I didn't provide a link, but I do want to make sure to mention here that TABE has something called online training tools. And the online training tools are something that can be used with students before they take a computer-based TABE test, and it simulates the testing environment that students will see when they're taking the TABE assessment. That online testing tools environment should also include the calculator that will appear for computer-based testing. Highly recommend for your math students that they get some calculator practice. Even if your students are doing paper-based testing and you're giving them a calculator, it would still probably would be helpful to look at the calculator guide and see what functions and what types of keying that students might need to do in order to take the calculator active portions of the TABE math test. And then also there is a reference sheet for the formulas and the conversions that students will need to know when they take each level of the TABE 1314 math assessment. So definitely if you have for example, you have an intermediate math class and a lot of the students will be post-testing in level M. If you pull up the formula, or the reference sheet for TABE level M, you'll see the formulas and the conversions that students will need to know to take level M of the TABE assessment. And that might be a good thing to just make sure that students understand those formulas, understand those conversions, and they understand how to do that so that they'll be ready for when they post-test. And then for my ESL folks, I'm also including a link to the TABE CLAS-E objective structure. This basically is how DRC structures the CLAS-E assessment. So it gives a little bit more insight to when, for example, if they say that a certain level of the test assesses morphemes and syntax. What does that mean? For people who might not be from a literacy background, if you have an instructor who is teaching in your class and they don't come from a literacy background, that might not be familiar verbiage to them. So the CLAS-E objective structure specifies what types of tasks students will need to do when they're being assessed on morphemes and syntax, for example. So I would absolutely recommend for my ESL folks to use that CLAS-E objective structure and take a look at what exactly students are being assessed on at each level of CLAS-E. In addition to the resources tab, again, I absolutely would recommend going through that resources tab. There's a ton of stuff in there. But they also are recordings of the TABE 1314 and CLAS-E Forms C and D webinars that were done by DRC. There is a link. Again, once you guys get the slides, there is a link to recordings of the webinar that was conducted by TABE, so you can see how those tests were being presented by DRC themselves. Obviously, they'll have some more detailed information because they made the test. So I would recommend taking a look at that webinar if you have maybe some more specific questions about about how the test is formulated. We'll do as much information as we can here, but the coming from the creators of the test, you're going to get probably the best information. Couple slides ago, I mentioned that DRC did update TABE certification training for 1314 and the new CLAS-E forms. I've provided a link here to the new certification training. Please remember that anybody in your program who is administering the tests, and we'll actually, this is actually a really good segue to the next slide. Anyone in your program who is administering tests should be trained on that test. Somewhere in the premises, there should be certificates showing that so-and-so has completed certification for TABE 1314 and or TABE CLAS-E, TABE CLAS-E Forms C and D. Of course, if your program only uses TABE 1314, it's only necessary to do the two, actually, let me back up. There are 3 modules in the new training. There's a module for TABE 1314, a module for the new CLAS-E forms, and a kind of a general TABE module, like about how the TABE tests work, essentially. If you only do TABE 1314 in your program, you don't administer TABE CLAS-E, it's not necessary to take the CLAS-E training if that's not something that you need. You can skip that module, but please take the other 2 modules. If you're doing TABE 1314, please take the 1314 specific module and the module about general testing practices for TABE. Similar, I would say similar if your program is only doing CLAS-E and you're not doing 1314. However, when I got your surveys back that I used to create this session, nobody said that. Everybody either just uses 1314 or uses 1314 and CLAS-E together. So point being, please, it's only necessary to train on the series that you're going to be using in your program. And that is documented in the CCR assessment manual as well as the TABE website. That we need to make sure that folks are trained before they administer the tests. All right, I'm going to stop here before we move on to talking about sunsetting tests. Lee, are you seeing anything from the chat or any raised hands?
Nope, so far we're good.
So far we're good. Okay.
Feel free to type in the chat.
Excuse me. Yep. Feel free to type away in the chat. I'm going to stop here for a little bit just to give folks a chance if they have questions. Because again, we want to make sure that we're coming away from this with everybody feeling pretty confident about the new tests. Even if you were at that level 1, I want you to feel confident about what to do next, essentially.
So Tracy has typed that she has a question, so I believe that means she probably wants to unmute herself since she didn't enter the question in the chat.
Okay. Tracy, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Can a instructor test their own students as long as they don't grade the score? Like you have a instructor that works at the prison and he TABE tests them and then they bring the scores back to the person to scan the scores.
That's a good question, Tracy. So right now, and I'm talking right now as in May 27th, 2025, the 2024-25 assessment manual still says that instructors should not assess their own students. That is still in play. We are going to do some training next month on the new assessment manual. I will say there are some changes coming. I will not go into detail until we train on the new manual. But through June 30th, we are still under that 24-25 assessment manual that says instructors should not assess their own students. So that's right now, that's still where we are. But again, we do have a new assessment manual coming out. There are going to be some changes to that I will go into when we train on the new manual next month. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Lee, thank you so much for dropping that because I did see where Chanel had asked about the updated tape training. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I hope I chose the correct
You
URL.
did, tape
Okay,
certification
awesome.
process. That's exactly right.
Awesome. Okay.
So Chanel, that should be where you access the new training.
But like I mentioned in the chat, for everyone, you will also be able to access these slides, and that link is included in the PowerPoint slide deck. So,
Thank you, Lee. All
of
right.
course. And Mary's also got a question. I don't know if you want me to read it aloud or.
Go ahead. Yes, please read aloud.
Okay. When should we expect TABE 13, 14 testing materials that have been ordered?
Mary, thank you. That's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't know TABE's timeline on materials delivery. I do know that they said they expected to start shipping TABE 13, 14 in, I think, early June. But I don't know the exact timeline. I think, and Lee, actually, let me ask you if, no, we're not to that page. We're not to that slide yet.
Okay.
When we get to the slide, Lee, where we talk about ordering
Mhm.
tests, if you don't mind dropping that link in the chat with the order form, because that will, that has some sort of a notation about when shipments will begin.
Okay,
So,
I can definitely do that.
yeah, Mary, hopefully that'll answer your question in a general sense. Unfortunately, I just don't have like an actual, like, everything will start shipping on June 5th or anything like that, unfortunately. But I think there's like a general timeline on the order form page. Thank you, Lee, for dropping that in the chat when we get to it. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Lee, if you don't mind reading that out loud, just so people don't have to keep listening to my voice.
Yeah. I have taken both TABE part 1 and 2, but have not received the part 2 certificate. I have checked my junk mail and still have not received it. Is there someone I may call for this?
Great. So actually, Mary, I'm gonna, when we get toward the end of this presentation, I'm gonna provide the email address of our TABE rep. She generally is the person that we would reach out to if we have questions about maybe something that we were expecting to get from TABE, but we haven't seen it yet. So we'll have Chastity's email address up a little bit later on in the presentation. Thanks for asking. I would definitely, that's probably going to be a question for Chastity that she might be able to find out for you. Thank you for asking, though. All right.
So unless anyone else has any more questions, I think we're clear for the chat.
Cool, cool. Thank you so much, Lee. Yeah, I appreciate you reading out because I don't want people to get tired of listening to me for this whole 90 minutes.
I think your voice is very relaxing, though
Thank
it
you.
can lure me to sleep if I have eaten too much. So I appreciate your voice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Still good to hear from different people. But so let's talk about sunsetting. So for those of you guys who might be newer to CCR testing, sunsetting is just the word that we use when we are powering down from an old assessment series. In this case, we are referring to TABE 1112 and TABE CLAS-E Forms A and B, since we are getting ready to see those expiring very soon. So these are just some considerations as we're sunsetting the old series. Just a reminder of the expiration dates for those series. CLAS-E is going to expire on June 30th, about a week and 3 days, sorry, a month and 3 days from now. So that is almost done for. And then TABE 1112, again, we received a year extension from Octay. So that is expiring next June 30th, 2026. So this is just kind of keep this in mind as you're sunsetting your tests. So what are some things to keep in mind as we're sunsetting our outgoing tests? So the number one thing I would say is identify what I would call your priority testers. That is essentially starting kind of with any student who has pre-tested in the old CLAS-E series or in 1112 and has not yet post-tested. So we want to, and obviously we need to make sure they have the hours to post-test. If they're only, 12 or 20 or 25 hours in, we don't want to do that. But if we have them at the minimum hours for for testing, we probably want to make a plan to get them post-tested as soon as possible. Another group of priority testers might be students who have post-tested in the outgoing test series, but they've not yet made a gain. So if we want to try one more time to see if they can make a gain, again, making sure that we have the appropriate number of hours since their most recent test, those might be our next priority folks. So that's essentially we want to test any students that we can who have pre-tested in the outgoing series. As we mentioned previously, think of a cutoff date. What's a cutoff date that makes sense for your program? Our last set of classes for the program year is started on May 15th. We probably shouldn't pre-test anyone else after May 15th on these old assessments. We probably need to be switching over to the new assessments by that point. So just picking a cutoff date is a good strategic move for that. And just remembering, we brought this up very briefly before, but I do want to emphasize this because this is something that we say in the assessment manual and that our vendors say and that Octay says. So this is like everybody says, a student cannot pre-test to post-test in different test series. So this is saying that if you pre-test a student in TABE 11-12, you cannot post-test them in TABE 13-14. That's just going to register as a brand new pre-test if you administer TABE 13-14 to them at that time. So if they pre-tested in 11-12, they have to post-test in 11-12 as well. So just keeping in mind where students are and what they've pre-tested in. Please check Advances for their testing history, especially maybe if you share this student with another provider, because that happens sometimes. We know that sometimes students are working with two different providers. That's fine. That's great. Please don't discourage them from doing that, but please do check their testing history on Advances when you're thinking about post-testing. And then what do we do when we have an expired test and we have materials that we aren't using anymore? So the strong recommendation is to securely dispose of TABE materials that have expired by shredding them. I know that some of our other assessment vendors ask for us to send them an email saying, I disposed of, 15 test books in such and such series and with such and such level, that sort of thing. TABE does not require that. TABE just says that if you're going to destroy your tests, just shred them. On our most recent TABE assessment call, our assessment collaboration early at the beginning of the month, we did hear from our TABE rep that TABE is okay with us using expired, keyword expired testing materials for instructional purposes. So essentially, if, after July 1st and afterwards, if you have some old TABE CLAS-E levels Forms A and B that you want to use in instruction, TABE has informed us. And again, unfortunately, I don't have a link for this because this was verbalized on our last TABE collaboration back on May 5th. But it was stated explicitly by our TABE rep that it would be okay to use expired materials for instructional purposes. In bold, with an underline, please do not use currently approved materials for instruction. Do not take out that TABE 11-12 because now that TABE 11-12 has been extended for a year, it's still approved. It's not expired. Do not take those old TABE 11-12s out and use them in class, please. Please, please, please. Only expired materials. According to our TABE rep. Now, we at the CCR assessment office, we weren't aware until very recently that was accepted by TABE. So we are making some determinations, maybe for a future iteration of the test administration manual, whether we're going to keep this or whether we're going to make a determination that any expired testing materials have to be disposed of securely. We're still making a call on that. But until we do, we're going to go with what TABE says, with what our vendor says, and we'll say that it's okay to use those expired materials for instruction. I'm just going to say one more time. Expired. Okay. Lee, I think I saw some things come through in the chat. Please, if you don't mind reading those out, please.
Definitely. Okay. So firstly, if our college decides to keep 11-12 as a placement test so that all students have an EFL for the year, can we do the change of assessment after they get a placement test for the new year?
Yes, so it's okay. So it looks like it's the team from Alamance Community
Alamance, yep.
College. Thank you. Great, great, great. So yes, because 11-12 has been extended for another year, it is okay to continue using it. However, the idea is to do this with an eye toward pre-testing them in the new series before next June. So yes, if you you are welcome to do that if you would like to do so, because it is still approved. 11-12 is still approved for the upcoming year. I would definitely say though, if you the earlier that you start to make that transition, the more smoothly it'll go by the time you have to start using it on July 1st, 2026. But yes, if you want to go ahead and do a placement on 11-12 for the new program year, if that makes sense for your program, yes, absolutely. I'd say just try to get that post-testing done when you can, and try to get those students switch over to 13-14 when you can. So just be aware that if you thinking about the look back period starts on October 5th. I would need to go back to the assessment manual and get the exact date. But we'll just say the look back period that starts in early October. Remembering that if you test somebody in a certain assessment after the look back period, that can pull forward if they don't have any other testing that's succeeded it. So you would definitely want to make sure that the students in that situation had a 13-14 test sometime afterwards that can pull forward to the new year. What we don't want to do is have an 11-12 test pull forward to the we don't want to have it pull forward to the 26-27 program year, because there will be no way to post test in that situation. Hopefully that answers your question, Alamance team. If it doesn't, please feel free to come off mute or to clarify your question in the chat, either one, and hopefully I'll get it right. Thank you, Lee, for grabbing that. Go ahead, and I see there's another one if you don't mind reading that.
I was gonna say Karen from Lenore is asking, or she's providing a different situation where we've got students in 11-12 and then others in 13-14. So how will that impact the beginning EFL for this upcoming programmatic year, 2025 to 2026?
Great. Thanks for asking that, Karen. So basically, it's just whatever test pulls forward, whatever their most recent test is going to pull forward. If their most recent test is in 11-12, it'll pull forward, and the students will have an opportunity to make a gain on that 11-12 test in the 25-26 program year. If their most recent test is a 13-14, because Karen, I think you were one of my people who said you were on a 3, that you had started piloting 13-14. If you have some students who are coming into the new year with a 13-14 pretest, they should plan to post test on 13-14 sometime in the new program year. It doesn't affect what their EFL is. That's dependent on what score they earn on the test. It just means that you it would be wise to make plans to post test them on whichever series they're coming into the new year with, if that makes sense. And I understand that, especially for my paper-based testers, there is a really tight turnaround time for switching to TABE 13-14 or the new CLAS-E series. I completely understand that that's a real tight turnaround time. So if you have some students coming into the new year with 11-12, that's fine. It's just being cognizant of what test their pre-test will be for the new year, so we know how to post-test them. Awesome.
Sounds like there'd be more tracking if you're using both placement tests for different students. So
exactly.
And it makes sense to Karen, and you've got a great memory, Jen, because I even confirmed that Karen answered 3 about the program. So
she stuck out because she was one of my few 3s. I had a bunch of 1s, 2s, and 4s. Karen was one of my 3. So Lenore Community College, good job for piloting.
I'm impressed.
The new TABE tests. Oh gosh, any other questions? Lee, are you seeing
I'm
any
not
hands
seeing any
coming
more,
through?
but again, feel free to type in the chat. I know you're getting to the Q&A portion of things, Jen. So if I see some more as you're answering questions that were already submitted, I can definitely add to your list.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Of course.
Absolutely. So this is, as Lee mentioned, time for Q&A. So these are questions that you guys sent to me when we did the survey for what people feel like they need to know about the new TABE assessments. Again, as I mentioned, this is very similar to the webinar that we did back when we had new BEST and CASAS assessments coming in, because we do need to know similar basic information. This part will be a little different because you guys did ask different questions for the TABE, upcoming TABE. So want to make sure that I get these pre-submitted questions first, but then if there's any other questions, Lee will help me out with those after we finish. So, Lee, this is where, if you don't mind clicking on this link and putting it in the chat, we had a question that came through the survey and also that just came through now about purchasing the new TABE assessments. So, if we go to the order forms tab of the TABE website, the order forms for all of their current series are there, as well as some supplementary materials. But most importantly for our purposes today, the pricing and order information for, excuse me, TABE 1314 and for the new forms of TABE Class-E are included on that website. And again, there is, I believe, something written in red next to the two new series to say when the shipping should begin for those new series. So Mary, hopefully that'll answer your question in a general sense. Again, unfortunately, I don't have any dates, like specific dates, but hopefully that'll give you a general idea of when the shipping will begin for TABE 1314. Cool. Lee, thank you so much for getting that in the chat. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Next question. What are some curriculum resources I can use to help with instruction? There were a few of you guys who asked about curriculum resources. TABE does not provide its own curriculum resources. There's a ton of the other resources they have, like the blueprints and the reference sheets and those sorts of things. But if you're looking for a little bit more extensive curriculum resources, TABE has started facilitating webinars with some of the publishers who have who have instructional materials aligned with the test. I'm provided a link here to the webinars page on the TABE website. Ever since the release of TABE of the new TABE series, the only one that I've seen so far is Aztec. So if anyone here uses Aztec or is thinking about using Aztec, there is a webinar on that page, on the linked page, with the information about how Aztec is supporting TABE 1314. However, the other publishers that have done webinars with TABE in the past have not yet done webinars about how they're going to support 1314 or the new Class-E series. So I would look out for that. That's just something to just keep your eyes peeled for. And if I find out about anything, I'll make sure to send it forward as well. Another big question about the new TABE series is how long are the testing times? Again, I remember being at a provider when we switched to TABE 1112 and seeing that pretty big increase in testing times. So what I've done is I've linked here the testing times for the new 1314 and the new Class-E forms. One thing that I can notice when I've looked at this is that the testing times are all more uniform between levels. So again, I do remember for example, I'm just going to use the TABE math because that's coming to mind first as an example. For TABE math, you had this length of testing time for level E, this length of testing time for level M, this length for D, this length for A. What I noticed when I was looking through the testing times for the new tests is that those are now much more uniform between levels. So if you're taking the TABE math test, regardless of which level it is, you have this much time to use for part 1 and this much time to use for part 2, essentially, regardless of the level. So again, I would recommend please go through these documents when you get the slides for today's call, and that'll go over with you how long the testing, the assigned testing times are for each section. I know that when we did our TABE assessment collaboration at the beginning of the month, somebody actually asked about this during the call. And I know that our TABE rep said that they are conducting research to see what lengths of time students are actually using. So let's say, for example, that the reading test says that it's 50 minutes for part 1 and 50 minutes for part 2 on the allotted testing time, but maybe it's not taking students quite so long to do those sections of the tests. So I know that TABE is working on, I think, some research to see what the actual testing times are turning out to be for those students. So of course, if I hear anything about it, I'll pass it forward. But seeing as how we don't really have any students who have done the paper-based tests yet for TABE 13-14, there's still some testing that's got to be done before the research comes out, I think, if my understanding is correct. All right, another question, because this is another addressing kind of the TABE 11-12 transition. How will the paper-based answer sheets be formatted for the new tests? So again, going back to the 9-10 to 11-12 transition, I remember one of the things that we saw was that instead of having a uniform answer sheet for all levels of TABE, there was a set of answer sheets for level E, answer sheets for level M, answer sheets for level D, and for level A separately. With TABE 13-14, TABE has gone back to using a common answer sheet for all levels for the 13-14 test. So that was something that they brought up when we did our collaboration call at the beginning of the month, and it's something that I observed when I looked at the order forms for the new tests. So hopefully that's what you'll see as well. For TABE CLAS-E, there is a change, there is a split in answer sheets. Again, by looking at the order form, it appears that level 1 has a separate answer sheet from levels 2 through 4 in TABE CLAS-E, the new TABE CLAS-E series. So again, that's what I observed when I was looking at the order forms. Please confirm for yourselves, but that was what the indication was in the answer forms. I will say that both series, both 13-14 and the new TABE CLAS-E series, both have separate answer sheets for the locator. So it will be necessary to purchase separate answer sheets for your locator tests. But once you've done the locator, everything else is on a uniform answer sheet, regardless of the test level that students are being assessed in. This question did not come up in our surveys, but it has come up to me since in the time since we've done the survey. So we did find out from TABE that level L, which I know several of you might use with your lowest proficiency learners, level L of TABE was not approved for TABE 13-14. So there was some concern, and yet we know that there are certain populations of students that we serve who might use level L a little bit more heavily than other populations. There was some concern at the time that we learned that how are we going to assess these students? Level E is a little bit too challenging for them, but we do need to make sure that we have a pre-test for them and that we have a placement for them. So thankfully, when we found out about that extension to TABE 11-12, that kind of answered our question for us. Because of the extension to TABE 11-12's approval, it is appropriate to continue to use level L in TABE 11-12 for those students because it's still approved. So please continue to use that until we have more information about approval for level L in TABE 13-14. So please continue to use TABE 11-12 for your students who are testing in level L, essentially. And then the last thing, I mentioned this earlier, if you have some specific questions that are about maybe about TABE itself or about how TABE works for your program, if you have some specific questions that are very specific to the TABE test, Our TABE rep, Chastity Wright, is the most appropriate person to contact for those questions. Chastity's email address is on the TABE website, and I've also included it here on the slide. So Chastity is a great resource, very knowledgeable. Please do feel free to reach out to her with any questions that you might have about some of those kind of TABE, very TABE specific questions that you might come across as you are making this test transition. All right, I'm going to stop here because that's the end of the pre-submitted questions. But Lee, I want to see if there's any other questions that have come in the chat.
So far, I think we're good. But again,
Great.
we're giving you time. Feel free to raise your hand virtually or type in the chat.
Great. And Lee, thank you for putting Chastity's email address in the chat because, again, she's a fantastic resource. So thank you for getting that in there.
Of course.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting, I guess I can also just mention some things because
Yes.
Jen has said multiple times you will receive the PowerPoint. So I'm putting in the chat our professional development archives page on NC Title II. This is actually where we upload all recordings for our webinars and include the materials like PowerPoints or documents, resources, etc. So definitely this will be uploaded to the professional development archives at some point in time, hopefully next week. So just wanted to mention that, where you'll be able to access the PowerPoint and revisit this recording.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee. Thank you. So yeah, guys, please use this website for this or any other assessment or any other webinars, period, that you want to go back and review.
We have a lot.
Exactly. There's a lot in the archives. It's a rich, rich resource.
Robust and rich. And again, while we're still waiting, because we are talking about assessments, I think this is actually a good segue or connection. Jen will be running the NRS assessment webinar in June. The manual is being updated, so she is providing that training for this upcoming 2025 to 2026 programmatic year. We're going to provide that before we close this program year. So I am placing in the chat the registration link for that webinar. So if you have not registered, feel free to sign up and join us. It will be on, when will it be? Of course, I'm sure you don't even have it memorized, Jen. June 25th at 2.
Yeah, I have to pick up my notebook.
Yeah. That'd be crazy if you actually had that one memorized.
I do not.
So, yes. So feel free to register. It's also on our PD calendar on nctitle2.org. There's a lot of great stuff there on that website. So yeah, come join us.
Please, please. And guys, I'm going to tell y'all, it is such a relief to be able to offer that webinar before the new program year begins.
Exactly.
Because we were, thank goodness, able to get our new manual approved in enough time to do that.
Yeah.
So we are very, very grateful for that. So
we're going to get you started with all the tools that you need, for
2025,
2026, at least for assessment. I can't promise.
Exactly. If nothing else, for assessment.
Yes, which is pretty important.
Very important because we know that this is our biggest, even with all of our new MSGs, this is still our biggest source of MSGs across the state, pre to post testing. So we want to make sure that everybody knows what your tools are and knows what your processes are so that you can get any MSGs that you can get from this.
Exactly.
One thing I will say is we're wrapping up because I'm not seeing any other questions either, Lee. And I'd be happy to give you all some time back if we can do that. I just want to mention, and I've said this a couple times, but I really want to emphasize, please talk to me if you need technical assistance for anything related to assessment. I am here. I am available. If you need to talk through strategies for test transition, I'm here. If you feel like you need to if you need help with, maybe making just a general plan for post-testing students to make sure that you're keeping your post-testing rate where you'd like it, please talk to me. Any technical assistance, I'm happy to provide for you guys. So my email address is here. Please reach out if there's anything I can help with.